Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what is the future for Hawaii's largest power utility? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff of Hawaii News Now. The Public Utilities Commission is considering a $4.3 billion proposal to merge the Hawaiian Electric companies with Florida-based NextEra Energy. The prospective partners say the deal will create a more affordable, clean energy future in Hawaii, but not everyone is convinced. Critics say they suspect NextEra is not vested in the state's clean energy goals, and having its board of directors based on the other side of the country is not in Hawaii's best interest. Some critics suggest consumer-owned utility cooperatives or municipal utilities might be better options. Tonight, what is the future for Hawaii's largest power utility? We want to hear from you during tonight's conversation. Call 973-1000 if you live on Oahu, or 800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. You can also watch Insight streamed live at pbshawaii.org. Just click on the title of tonight's show or find us on Twitter at PBS Hawaii. Now to our panel. Alan Oshima is the president and CEO of Hawaiian Electric Company, a subsidiary of Hawaiian Electric Industries, or HEI, which provides electrical service on Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island. In June, investors holding about 90% of HEI shares voted to merge with NextEra Energy. Jeffrey Ono is the executive director of the Division of the Consumer Advocacy for the state of Hawaii, also known as the Consumer Advocate. He has recommended that the Public Utilities Commission reject the NextEra Energy Hawaiian Electric merger as it's been proposed. Eric Gleason is the president of NextEra Energy Hawaii and leads all operations related to the proposed merger. NextEra Energy recently revised its original proposal by adding more than 50 new binding commitments to address concerns regarding the planned partnership. And Representative Chris Lee is chairman of the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. Representative Lee has expressed strong concerns about the merger between NextEra Energy and Hawaiian Electric and has suggested looking at publicly owned utilities as an alternative. Governor David Ige planned to join us but withdrew. His office said it would be inappropriate for him to comment because the merger plan is still pending before the Public Utilities Commission. And of course, as we all know, Governor Ige has come out against this merger. Let me start with you, Alan Oshima from HECO. Why did you decide to sell off this quite venerable Hawaii company? What was that decision like?
Well, I didn't decide to sell off. The board of directors had a duty to evaluate an offer. As it has a fiduciary obligation to its shareholders to evaluate offers, legitimate offers to purchase. And so it really looked hard at that offer. Once it came to terms that the offer was reasonable, then it went to look at other things like community, employees, and really evaluate whether this would be a good fit culturally for Hawaii.
But why the sale? Why was it necessary to sell?
It's not necessary to sell. In the true, if we were going to be the utility of the past and we could continue on, we are faced in Hawaii with probably the most aggressive plans to reach a 100% renewable future, and we're aligned with that. I think what NextEra brings to us, and I've said this publicly, not only culturally do we fit with the way they operate, we're trying to become more like them as a utility, but we also need their purchasing power, their greater access to cheaper money to fund the investments we have to do, and then their technology. So all of those things will help us get to the 100% renewable in a better way.
Jeffrey Ono, the Consumer Advocate, why did you folks come out against this? And give us a sense of where you folks saw HECO prior to this merger. Were they doing a good job in terms of their control of rates and their reliability?
Well, let me answer the first question first. So we have recommended to the PUC to reject this transaction. And the reason is that we feel that there are insufficient benefits to consumers. And especially when you put that in the light of a $1.4 billion shareholder premium. What they're offering to consumers is just insufficient. And we believe that the the standard of review should be that there needs to be substantial net benefits to consumers in order for the PUC to say that this is really in the public interest.
Let me ask something just so I understand, because I think our audience are not made up of financiers. And so when you talk about a $1.4 billion shareholder premium, is that what you said?
Yes.
And then you compare that, is this a dollar figure thing where you're looking for how much money is it going to go to the consumers?
The $1.4 billion premium is measured at the time the transaction was announced. So that's December 3rd, I believe, 2014. And so it's a comparison of what the HEI stock price was and what the offer was from NextEra at that time.
Okay, so stockholders were basically offered $1.4 billion to let their stock go.
They were offered $4.3 billion for the entire deal.
Right.
So the value of the Hawaiian Electric companies would be 4.3 minus the $1.4 billion premium for the shareholders.
Okay.
That's how I believe, and that's the way NextEra had responded to information requests that had been submitted by, I believe, the Department of Defense. So that number, the 1.4 billion, comes from NextEra themselves.
Okay, we'll go into a little bit more into that later on. Eric Gleason from NextEra, Mr. Ono is one of a whole array of people who's come out against this deal, except for the union just this week. Yeah. You pretty much have not got anybody who's come in unequivocally in favor of you. How do you move ahead from here? What are your chances of this deal actually being accomplished with that kind of opposition? And what's your strategy moving ahead?
Well, I'd say first, Darrell, it's actually early in the process, or maybe it's halfway in the process. It started with our application in January, and we are now through a series of testimony, 7 rounds of testimony from between all the parties. We're most of the way through the listening sessions, the PUC listening sessions. The last one's here on Oahu next week. There's going to be a hearing in starting November 30th and going through December, potentially beyond that. Probably closing arguments from there, and then the commission's got to make the decision. We have 3 commissioners who need to make the decision based on the record before them, and so there's time to continue the discussion. And as part of that, we're listening. We're going around the state and meeting with people, listening to the views of folks around the state, but also engaging with the consumer advocate, who we have a great respect for Jeff and his positions. At the same time, the other interveners, and we're trying to find common ground. So, you mentioned the more than 50 additional commitments that we introduced in August, and that's really indicative of our approach. We're trying to understand what the concerns people are, and trying to meet those concerns as best we can.
Chris Lee, representative and chairman of the Energy Committee in the State House. You heard Mr. Oshima say that they pretty desperately needed an infusion of money in order to modernize and improve this grid. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that something to be supported?
It depends how you look at it, and I think where we want to go as a society. Let me back up just for a second to put this sort of all in context, because I think for the average person, it's over some
It's high level.
It is.
I find myself quite confused sometimes. I'll confess that.
But I think people here want to be engaged in the state, and I think we have a population that is above average, and folks I think can digest this stuff. We have probably once in a lifetime decision that's being made here. It's probably the single biggest decision being made in Hawaii's modern history, and it's probably going to have decades of potential consequences one way or the other that we have to really deal with. And that's something that I think people really have a little bit of anxiety about, and I think that's generating a lot of the concern out there. I mean, all the polls to date have shown pretty overwhelming opposition so far, and I think that's something that needs to be carefully, I think, heard by NextEra and HECO, and perhaps prompt more outreach, which I think they're trying to do. But the public really wants 4 things out of this. They want cheaper rates, they want renewable energy, they want the ability to generate their own power, and most of all, I think they want accountability with the utility. And my auntie, actually, who incessantly texts me this, searching for updates, has said multiple times, the biggest thing for her is that over the years, she's seen her utility bills go up and up and up. I think, like a lot of people, feel that frustration, but most of all for her, the frustration has been that she has no say in the decisions the utility makes that determine how fast those rates rise.
Okay, we'll go back to, we're going to talk a little bit more about governance and so on later on, but Alan Oshima, I'll give you a chance to respond to that. And I think he has a point when he says that we've all felt our rates go up. You know, sometimes it seems like when the wind blows, the power goes out.
Let me get to that right away.
Sure.
I mean, you saw in the paper today where our rates are the lowest in many, many years. The average residential rate is about $137 right now for 500 kilowatt hours of usage. What we've seen is actually a great decline in rates over the last 9 to 10 months.
But are you responsible for that, or is that just the price of oil?
We don't get credit for holding our operations at a pretty level rate. The fluctuations in rates are the result of oil. And so our true desire to move off of oil to get a more stable platform for rates is what we're after. And to move to renewables with technology will get a lower rate. But it won't happen instantaneously. I do want to also mention, though, that I also have great respect for Jeff, and we've known each other for a while. The substantial net benefit test has never really been the test that's been approved by this commission in any of these transactions. No net harm, basically, is the test. By statute, you meet certain standards. Again, this is a highly regulated industry.
I just want to ask, can you use layman's terms to explain that to me? How would you explain it to
in
an
a
average
substantial net benefit, you're looking for $1 to be paid equivalency to your customers. In the no net harm test, are you meeting all of the standards to run the utility in a way that meets all of the public requirements? Are you fit, willing, and able? And are you going to run it in a customer-sensitive way, basically, and support the community? Those are the tests. It's no net harm. You're not going to be any worse, I hate to say that, than the utility. It's not a substantial net benefit test. However, I think what NextEra has done to say there are really substantial net benefits in what they're what they're proposing.
Jeff, because that was directly at you. I mean, have the regulators changed the rules here to set a higher standard for this merger than you might have set for some other company?
No, the consumer advocate has always pushed for the substantial net benefit test on any type of utility merger. And what's happened in the past is we've arrived at settlement agreements with the merging company. And so what's happened is that we've gotten those substantial net benefits in our settlement agreements. And so the Public Utilities Commission has not actually gotten to that question.
Right.
They've said we don't need to answer that question whether it's a no harm or substantial net benefit test because of a settlement agreement.
Okay. And I was the attorney for many of those mergers. So I just want the record to reflect what the status of the law is.
Okay.
I mean, I commend him for trying to do that, and a settlement can result in that, but it is not the current standard that it's applied.
Go ahead, real quick, Chris.
No, real quick, I just wanted to chime in on the earlier conversation, which is, I think part of the frustration, even though fuel prices go up and down, and that dictates a lot of the small fluctuations in price that people feel. I mean, a lot of the concern that we're hearing from the public is that, over the last decade, if you look at the broad trend, utility prices have gone up about 80% here at HECO, but the real concern that people have is that utility profits have gone up 90-something%, roughly. And I think that's part of the disconnect, because when you ask where we're going, that all factors into what sort of policies, what sort of infrastructure investment is being made that determine what prices are being set for ratepayers.
Okay, let me give.
Go ahead.
I want to make sure you guys each
are regulated. We are given a return on equity that we have the opportunity to earn. Over the last 10 years, we have very rarely returned what we are allowed to return. So it's not about the profits. We are regulated. We're given the opportunity basically by the Constitution to be able to earn that so that we can attract capital to do the heavy investment that's needed by any utility. Despite ownership, you need capital because it's a capital-intensive business.
Okay, let me give Eric Gleason from NextEra a chance. We've gone around the table once, and I want to make sure anything you want to respond to, and I'd like to know, in layman's terms, what is it you bring to Hawaii that could not be brought by some other company or through some other arrangement?
Well, I think there really is no other company that I'm aware of that has three things that we bring. One is a history of actually getting off of oil. So we used to be the largest burner of oil in the U.S. of any power company. And as recently as 2002, we burned 40 million barrels of oil a year. It's really a de minimis amount now. Today, as we sit here today, the Hawaiian Electric companies burn as much oil for power generation as the rest of the country combined. So we actually have experience in getting off of oil that I think is unique. Second thing we bring is a unique experience base in renewable energy. We've, really starting from scratch over the last 20 or so years, we've built up the largest renewable energy business in the world in terms of the wind and sun. And the third thing we bring is a very strong balance sheet. Alan mentioned the importance of capital investment. I think Hawaii is going to need the utility to invest many billions of dollars in the coming decades in order to complete this transformation and get to 100% renewables. We have a strong balance sheet and the availability of capital to do that.
Okay, Jeff Ono, consumer advocate, does that answer the question about what is the benefit that we get? Is that enough of an answer for you?
That's not sufficient. And one of the things Eric didn't mention is Florida Power and Light has very reliable service. But we expect that from them in Hawaii as well. And so that's one of the things we're asking for. Give us that level of reliability in your service as measured by these standard metrics in the industry, and give it to us right away. And the same with the benefits that they've been talking about. We're asking that these benefits, the savings that NextEra says they can deliver because of their access to capital, because they say they can do things a lot cheaper than Hawaiian Electric could do them, give it to us on day one. Day one of the merger, we should be entitled to see those benefits given to consumers.
Let me ask, I want to start to pay some attention to the piles of questions we've been getting here. You guys have been watching this pile build up really fast. Thank you for hosting a discussion on the HECO NextEra merger. My question is pertaining to promise this merger will save consumers money. Currently, HECO actions are directly wasting consumer money, so what is NextEra going to do differently from HECO and in what time frame? But let's focus this question on what is the savings to consumers that you folks are promising, Eric, please?
Well, there's what we're promising and what we're estimating, which the second number is bigger, and I'll explain why. What we're promising is $60 million over a 4-year period. What we're estimating is an additional $405 million over the first 5 years after the merger is completed. And the reason for the difference is basically the utility business is a business where you pass on your reasonable costs of providing electricity service to customers. And so if we can find ways to reduce the cost of providing that service, and we believe we can, and we believe we're demonstrating that, and we can have a discussion with Jeff around how adequately we're demonstrating that. But we really believe we're going to be able to save customers money.
Let me just ask so to get clear, how does $60 million translate into a rate or to a bill?
So, well, I can tell you off the top of my head, the 465 total, which is the 60, that's coming out of our pockets, and the 405 that we're estimating in terms of cost savings that will be passed through to customers.
Over 5 years?
Over 5 years, so that 465. When you divide it by all the customers and you take account, there's small customers, there's large customers, you take it down to the typical household, it's about $400 in total savings that we're estimating over those first 5 years.
And then is that translated into a kilowatt hour rate? Because right now we're paying 3 times the national rate. Right?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember what that translates.
Well, and what do you think about that?
Well, as of right now, we're about 25 cents and change in Honolulu, so it's not really 3 times. But where you're getting, I think you also have to compare it to what the rates will be as we make the substantial investments in smart grid, all of the things that we have to harden our grid to be able to take more renewables. It's not a very black or white situation. There's a lot of investments that's needed. The PUC, the consumer advocate, others will all be around the table deciding what that looks like. We have dockets already open, power supply improvement plans, distributed generation plans. A lot of stakeholders will see what the total resource mix will look like for the state, but it's not going to be free.
And it sounds like you're saying people shouldn't expect a big decrease in their bills from this merger. Chris, what do you think of the numbers that they're expressing?
I think any savings is a step forward, but I think what people are really expecting and quite frankly looking for is something substantial that they're going to feel. And to have really, a few cents difference on a meaningful, regular, weekly, monthly basis that adds up to about $400 or $500 over 5 years is, I think, insignificant compared to what could be saved. And when you talk about, I think we talked about access to capital and other benefits, which is fantastic. But I think there's a double-edged sword there and something that people haven't talked about, which is that future infrastructure projects, and we need a lot of them here, future infrastructure projects add to those costs because you're basically paying for those as ratepayers. And so the question that has been raised by the PUC before is what level of infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure, and how expensive is it going to be? What do we need in real terms? And the Wall Street Journal sort of summed this up because people need to understand, you invest in these projects and the utility gets a return. They make a profit off of it for every dollar they spend. And the Wall Street Journal's story on this was basically utilities profit recipe, spend more. And the concern that the PUC raised around this, or just quote them briefly, is the Commission has serious concerns regarding the recent trend of HECO's increasing expenditures. It is difficult to ascertain whether HECO companies' increasing capital investments are strategic investments or simply a series of unrelated capital projects that effectively increase profits but appear to provide little or limited long-term customer value.
Okay. I need you to hold on for a second because we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. What I want to get back to is, it sounds like what we're saying is don't expect a big rate decrease right away. What about long term? Talking 10 or 20, 30 years away, when people have this vision of all the power coming from renewables free and maybe just paying a delivery cost, is that a panacea or is that something you guys can promise at some point? Eric Gleason from NextEra.
Well, first let me say, Daryl, I think what we're offering as part of this combination is actually reducing rates significantly. It works out depending on what oil prices are for as long as we're hooked on oil, and that's part of the problem. As long as we're hooked on oil, nobody knows exactly what the rates are going to be. But roughly speaking, it's about 4% of people's rates today. So you'd like it to go down more than that. I believe over time we will be able to get it down lower than that. But that's what we're estimating based on the opportunities we see today to lower costs for customers as part of this merger.
It's about 40%, the oil.
Yeah, yes, but I'm talking about the savings. Mm-hmm. The savings that we're offering as part of the merger is about 4% of a customer's bill. So, really, your question is, what's beyond that? And I think, for sure, we know that you can introduce renewable energy today cheaper than oil. Okay, renewable energy technologies, solar or wind, are getting down close to about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, now that's the cost of the electricity that you buy from the solar farm or the wind farm. Then you have to actually get it delivered to customers, and there's some additional cost for that. But that compares with the cost of oil-fired generation, which is up closer to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So,
Daryl, one of the things that I think we're missing is that when we filed our PSIP and looking at 2030, we're looking at a lower bill, not just a lower rate. Because what we want to do, and the utility of the future has to do, is to give customers options on how they use electricity and how they can control their own energy consumption. And by doing that, smart grid, electric vehicles, et cetera, if you changed out your gas-consuming vehicle to an electric vehicle, and we made it possible for you to do that with time of use rates so that you can fuel it with the sun at a lower rate, the total energy budget for a family of 4 would decrease by 30% today. And you would be giving up nothing. You'd be driving an electric vehicle instead of a gas-consuming vehicle, but powering it with electricity. So there's ways for the family to save dollars, real dollars, if you look at the total energy picture. And that's where our state is headed, is looking at the total carbon footprint for the state, not just how we produce electricity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to get to the 100% renewable issue probably after a break, but I want to read a number of questions. We have a lot of suspicion among our audience about the issue of profits and big money and so on, as you might expect. I'm against the merger because it's similar to how rail is being forced on it. Somebody is making big bucks on this merger, and it is political. Another one says, I'm against the merger. Constance Lau, the HEI chair, stands to make $10 million. I think it's a little less than that, but again, it's a question of big money. A couple of questions here about, the people who are going to be making the money is the shareholders and the people on the mainland who are going to take away the profits, sucking money out of the economy. Let me start with Jeff Ono, though, because he's actually analyzed this. Is the profit issue an issue for this merger or any involvement with the utility that's an independently owned utility?
Yes, it is. And our position is right now, Hawaiian Electric's return on equity is too high, and it needs to be reset. And then if this merger is to be approved, NextEra is saying that they can lower the cost of capital, they can lower the cost of money to the Hawaiian Electric companies. So that's even more reason why the return on equity ought to be lowered. So that profit margin, that the profit they make on their capital investment needs to be lowered. Right now it's at 10% for Hawaiian Electric, Hawaii Electric Light. Maui Electric is at 9%. We're saying all three of them should be at 9%, and that should be at day one if this merger is to be approved.
But that's a guaranteed profit? Well, not guaranteed profit, but that's the margin that would be allowed by the PUC.
It's the opportunity for the utility to earn a return on their capital investment.
Okay, now let me let you folks have a shot at that. Eric Gleason, you folks are a publicly owned company. You're beholden to shareholders. A lot more of those shareholders are probably mainland shareholders than Hawaiian Electric Industries shareholders. How do you answer people when they come to you and say, you guys are going to profit off of little old Hawaii over here?
Yeah, I actually, Daryl, I think there's two separate issues here. So I think the issue that Jeff's talking about is what kind of profitability should the utility be allowed to have? What kind of opportunity should they have? I think the more general concern that people have is if a mainland company comes in and acquires a local utility, aren't they taking, like you said, sucking the profits somewhere else? And I think that's actually an understandable concern, but probably it's based on a misunderstanding of what profits are. I mean, what people should really be thinking about, I think, is cash. Is cash coming into Hawaii or is cash going out of Hawaii? And we certainly believe that for decades, we're going to be investing into Hawaii, not taking money out. Hawaii needs a lot of capital to affect this transformation to clean energy. The profits are going to be reinvested in Hawaii for decades to come.
Chris Lee, quick response to that?
No, this is what I was, I think, alluding to earlier. There's a question as to what sort of investments are going to be made, what sort of spending the utility is going to have. The more they spend, the bigger the profit is, and that's where the incentive is. And so the question from the consumer is, how much is my bill going to go up by all the different projects that are going on? And more importantly, are those projects really necessary? Are they the Cadillac, platinum projects, or are we doing just what's necessary in the long term? And so when you talk about profit as part of this, I think the biggest thing I'll say is that, I believe HECO wants to do the right thing, the people who have been in charge. I think they're good people, but I think they have had to make decisions that compromise the interests of our local people in order to satisfy shareholders, and that has raised cost. And this is the potential risk that all this new investment, if not adequately monitored, and the PUC has said a lot of this investment so far has not been subject to their approval, that could raise costs significantly for people.
So
Okay.
if I may jump in,
Sure.
because the PUC just changed the model on how we are compensated on our capital investments. And we already had started to monitor more closely what's necessary, what's not. But the model, the decoupling model now under our RAM is a lot more comprehensive. So our capital budget for this year and this transition year as we transition to the new regulatory is about $300 million.
In about 30 seconds, we're going to come back and I'm going to ask for a layman's version of that. And we're also going to talk about, and I'm not teasing you, right? There's a couple
totally
acronyms in there
totally understand.
that were curveballs to me, and I'm sure curveballs to our audience. But when we come back after a short break, we will also be talking about these alternative things like co-ops, and we'll talk quite a bit more about renewable energy. For now, tonight, I want to remind our audience, we're talking about the future of Hawaii's largest power utility. Please call, email, or tweet your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 if you're calling from Oahu, and 800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. And I know Alan Ashiba from HECO, I cut you off there kind of rudely. I apologize. Please explain to me as briefly as you can. You're saying that what Chris Lee is saying is really not correct in terms of you folks buying Cadillacs and spending money on things you don't need? Is that a fair way of expressing what Chris is
that's
saying?
never been the intent. We have really good people. They are so committed to the customers. That's never their intent. I will admit, however, sometimes we don't explain what we're doing adequately. We're really trying to change that. But the Commission just gave us a new way of doing things. So we are not going to just be filing things and just automatically being compensated for it. The Commission has lowered the amount that we will be allowed to do some of the foundational things, and other than above those caps, the Commission is going to be looking at it. We're going to have to prove our case. So we're in a transition year this year, and I think it's changed.
Okay. Jeff Ono, I'm going to refer these questions to you first for some definition so we understand, but a lot of questions about what 100% renewable utility. Many people saying, oh, Germany recycles and, to generate energy, but their costs have increased too. Also others saying, when are we going to get off oil? What we need is a company that will provide 100% alternate energy soon. How long will it take to get off of oil? I think I said that. What is your folks' thought about, what does it mean when we say 100% renewable as a goal for a utility? What is that? What is the renewable piece of that?
Well, first of all, it's not 100% renewable energy. The law that was passed is 100% RPS, the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. So that's defined as net electricity sales divided by the amount of renewable energy. So it doesn't mean that the utility can have zero fossil fuel generation on its system. But it certainly means that we're going to have a significant amount of renewable energy in order to even meet that 100% RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard.
Okay, so what is that? How does that translate? Alan Oshima, help me with this. Under what Jeff Ona just described, how much of the electricity you generate under this 100% we're all talking about is actually going to be renewables if you meet this goal?
Well, we're going to try to get, really try to get to the 100% RPS as it's currently structured, but our real intent is to try to get as much renewable. We really believe that technology is going to drive, the prices on renewable energy have dropped dramatically just in the last few years. And so our grid solar projects that we've just got approval for is coming in at 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour. We've got some applications in there for between 11 and 12 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's just grid solar. We expect wind technology to improve. We expect battery technology to improve and prices to drop. So as you look, people expect an immediate change, but that's not how utilities work or can work. You have to make really optimal decisions economically. And so you have to look at a continuum of change to get to where you're going to be. In the meantime, we also have to honor contracts. The law was different in the past when we were really required to buy from independent power producers at the avoided cost of what it cost us to generate electricity.
Independent power producers are people like H-Power, like the coal plants, and
third parties.
Other third parties. Okay.
Not related to us. We don't make a dime on what we resell, although we are required to really do a lot of due diligence to make sure that they're going to serve the customer's interests, and we kind of monitor it. We don't profit by that at all. But we have to honor the contracts that were set quite a while ago, and they're at a higher level.
Okay, let me, Representative Lee, you're among the people standing bearers for this law. I'm going to throw you a softball here. Why don't you think that NextEra is able to?
Can we get a softball too?
Haven't you guys been
I don't know.
softballs?
I thought I threw you a couple earlier, but that's okay. Please, what are the concerns about NextEra's ability to meet this? And then I'll let Eric respond.
Well, I don't think it's so much a concern about whether or not they can meet 100% renewable energy. I think we're all in the same boat. Everybody wants to get there.
That's true.
I think the concern is that the way that technology is evolving, you have a lot more technology, batteries, PV, other things available to people at a much cheaper cost. And so the question is, does the utility make big investments in big solar farms and other things like that that all ratepayers have to pay for? Or do you capitalize on individual investment, people wanting to put PV and batteries on their own home, and the utility having the incentive to adapt to that and to utilize that? Because if they can do that, you can probably get there for a lot cheaper. The catch is, if you don't do that and you push back because you want to protect the business model, which is sort of the traditional centralized utility business model, you may run into problems.
Do you think, given their business model, they can really, they may be able to do this, but is it going to translate to the ratepayers the way you're hoping it would?
That's the problem. I think if we're going to maximize public benefit and maximize ratepayer savings, then you've got to get a utility that doesn't have a financial incentive to oppose the proliferation of new technology and distributed generation. And secondly, I think everybody has said this is the way the utility needs to go. A utility that transforms itself from a generator to a utility that manages a grid on which everybody can generate power in the long run. The question is, what incentive does the utility have to actually get there when they have to keep shareholder profits streaming?
Okay, Eric, Lisa, I mean, you've heard it all. I think that
A lot of it.
A big part of the question, we did get one caller said, Eric said they can offer, he's using your first name, and I was going to ask him.
We're all on a first name basis.
So we can offer lower energy costs in Florida. There they use nuclear power and LNG, liquid natural gas. You often talk about how low your rates are there and how much progress you are a renewable energy company, but Florida is really different from Hawaii, and I think people wonder, can you translate success like that here?
So can I
Please,
first respond
yes,
Representative Lee, and then I'll come
we
back
kind of
to
loaded it up for
the
you.
Florida
so go
thing.
ahead.
Thank you. So Representative Lee, I mean, we absolutely embrace technology and distributed energy. As to whether somehow the utility will be incentivized to make investments that are just good for the shareholders and not for customers, the document you've been reading from was actually something put out by the Commission associated with a decision a little over 2 years ago now. And if you keep reading through that document, you'll see that they specifically commended Florida Power and Light, which is our utility, for being a company that really puts customers first and starts by looking at what's the right thing for customers. And then through something we call the virtuous circle, hopefully we get good regulatory outcomes and we can attract more capital, we can make investments that'll do the right thing for customers, including lowering bills. So those are the kinds of investments that we try to make, and that's been our track record in Florida. So with respect to Florida, Florida's not Hawaii, and we certainly understand that. I've lived in both places. They're not the same. I will say, customers in both places do like lower cost energy. But I think the priority here, there's much more of a focus on renewable energy than there is in Florida. So we have more renewable energy in Florida than any other utility. There's 55 utilities in the States. We also have the lowest bills. We're big believers that cleaner energy and lower cost energy can go together. Yes, it's true, we have natural gas, not liquefied natural gas, but natural gas brought in by pipelines. We also have nuclear energy. Those are part of the mix in Florida as on much of the mainland. And we understand certainly that nuclear energy will never be part of the mix in Hawaii. I want to take that off the table right now. And natural gas may or may not. But regardless, our focus is going to be on doing the right thing for customers and communities, getting costs down, bringing in renewable energy. That's our focus, and making investments that will support that rather than work against it.
When you talk about renewable, let me just ask one quick question. When you talk about renewable energy, and this is getting back to Representative Lee's original question and a number of questions here about rooftop solar specifically, there is a real perception out there that you folks are against rooftop solar, that you prefer to be the generator yourselves. Do you deny that?
I deny that, yes, I do. Would you like me to elaborate?
Yes, please do.
Okay. I think what happens is that people look at how many rooftop solar companies we have in our Florida Power and Light service territory, which is actually quite few. It's a little over 3,000 out of 4.8 million customers. So it's a very small percentage. And they look at that and they say, well, surely, if that's any indication, then NextEra Energy is going to must be doing something to cause so few customers to have rooftop solar, and they're probably going to try to do the same thing here. So let me again say we understand Florida is not Hawaii, but also we're very proud of our track record in Florida. The facts are we don't stand in the way of our customers who want rooftop solar. Typically, on average, it takes 12 days from the time we get a completed application from a customer to the time we go in and we swap out their meter and their system's ready to go. 12 days. So if they want it, they've got it. They have net energy metering, full retail rates like you had here until recently. But the problem is, I think for the vast majority of customers, if you're in the solar business, the problem is that our rates are so low. Our rates are right now 9.7 cents a kilowatt hour for a residential customer. So, something like about a third the average of the Hawaiian Electric companies. They're about to go down again. And so, unfortunately, from an economic perspective, solar energy just doesn't compete at those levels. And there are customers who have it, but it's more because they want the solar energy rather than to save money.
Jeff Ono, I haven't given you a chance for a little while. How do you respond to that and on this issue of NextEra's ability or interest in getting to the model you folks want?
Well, Eric is right. When he says that, Florida Power Light is at 9.7 cents, I mean, that changes the economics for a customer's desire to put on rooftop solar. But it's very difficult to compare the Florida system with Hawaii. Hawaii is just so unique. The challenges in Hawaii are much, much greater. They have pipeline gas into Florida. If we're ever going to have natural gas, it has to come from LNG, and the governor has said he opposes the large infrastructure necessary for LNG importation to the state. It's difficult to know to what extent Florida Power and Light, NextEra would try to block additional rooftop solar in Hawaii. But what our concern is on this merger is not so much that they're going to be blocking it, but it's what kind of experience can they really bring to the table to Hawaii. Hawaiian Electric has all the experience integrating all this rooftop solar onto their system. Far greater percentage than what Florida and Power Light is. 12 days, yes, because they have so few applications. Hawaiian Electric has thousands of applications, in the queue. So it's just a different comparison. But we want to see, real experience level in their engineering coming to Hawaii if the merger is to be approved.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, I guess, respectfully disagree with Eric on the whole solar issue. I think the reason that you've had such a stagnation of rooftop solar and other things like that in Florida is because rates are low. But rates are low, and let's just call it what it is, because of the political makeup and the influence that the utility has had driving those regulations to prevent people from being able to take advantage of things, just basic things like leasing options for solar power. I mean, basically.
But really, though, isn't that what most people just want? They want low rates and they want reliability.
They absolutely do. But more than that, I think people want the ability to do it themselves and take control of their own bill. If that means putting in solar and batteries and doing their own thing, it does. But what it really gets to is, I think, a different culture in Florida where you have utilities, and FPL, Florida Power and Light, NextEra is not the only one, but they're one of the biggest that has made, I think, over $7 million in campaign contributions in the last year, pushing for specific limits on solar. The Miami Herald just did an expose saying, Big Energy's campaign cash keeps solar down in Florida. Big headline. I mean, these things aren't questions there, it's fact. Here, we're talking about something a little bit different, but we want to be clear that utilities have an interest in keeping control centralized, and that's sort of the concern here.
Okay, Eric, Gleason, I need to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I think, Daryl, you made the right point, which is, fundamentally, our customers are a happy bunch. By and large, we have very high customer satisfaction, and it's largely because we offer very low rates, very high reliability, and good customer service. And so, and as I say, if a customer wants to put in rooftop solar, they can. We're not standing in their way.
Okay, let's move on now, I think, to these other models. We did get a number of calls from people who are interested in the movement that emerged to some people quite out of the blue, this whole co-op thing. And I know, Representative Lee, you've actually said that you'd be willing to use eminent domain or the state's power to actually buy the utility and take it over. Why is it so important to you and supporters of this model that either the government or a nonprofit sort of organization take over this?
Well, first of all, to be clear, I don't have the power of eminent domain. The counties and the state and everybody else has a number of abilities to do that, but it takes a collective decision. But I think what people realize as elected leaders, it's not something that we should look at. We have an obligation to look at other alternatives because it's our job to protect the public interest. That's our job, and that means putting everything on the table. But to be clear, this discussion we're having is beyond what's in front of the PUC right now. The PUC is deciding whether or not NextEra is a good replacement for HECO in the context of an existing investor-owned centralized utility. What we have the obligation to ask is, what do people really want in Hawaii? What do we want for ourselves in years to come? It may not be that same model. And so as we look into this, the things we're seeing that's really driving this discussion is that, number one, cooperatives and other public utilities around the country have typically...
Let me just interrupt you enough to take a step back and tell me what's a cooperative.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, so on Kauai, we have a cooperative right now, which is a utility owned by all its membership. So basically all the ratepayers collectively own the utility. They elect their own leadership in regular elections, and those leaders drive utility decisions with a sole interest in benefiting the public and lowering rates.
And does it work?
I think it does. I think you'd have...
I was part of that formation. I was the attorney.
I'll come back.
So it's not...
Oh, you're the attorney for the...
Well, I was a seller's attorney, but I kind of represented... It was a hard road. And co-ops do have a role, but it's not always just to lower rates. So one of the attractive things, if I may be on your side on this, is that the co-ops could do things that are contrary to what state policy might be. In a general sense, they might want more green energy and actually have higher rates. That may be the case. Or they may reject some of that for the lower rates. So that's correct. Co-ops are generally in smaller service territories, and they are able to attract federally subsidized loans because there's a national interest in getting electrification to all of our areas. So it's not a universal model, and you have very different types of co-ops as well. You have just distribution co-ops that buy their energy from generators, or you have generator co-ops. And Kauai happens to be a generation co-op just because of our islanded geography. It has to be.
I don't disagree. I think you're absolutely right. But the important thing here is that co-ops serve the interest of their members at the discretion of their members. So if they all want something, they'll do it. And I think that's the fundamental difference between your typical utility and co-ops. But the other thing that co-ops have, which is so beneficial, is that they have lower access to capital even than the traditional investor-owned utility. And on top of that, what that means is they have typically lower rates, better customer satisfaction. These are co-ops. If you look at Kauai versus HECO, for example, over the last decade, rates have gone up for everybody because fuel costs have gone up, but costs at HECO have gone up twice as fast.
Let me ask, Eric Gleason, you've been watching this from the middle, and I'm wondering,
it's fascinating.
This debate about alternatives. One other alternative that I'll try and sum up very quickly is the idea of a municipal power company, basically a city-owned, kind of like the Board of Water type kind of power company. Right. Do you think that these concepts have been thrown out to sort of confuse the issue and create a further politicize what you're going through?
I think there is a genuine desire by many people in the state to have more of a say in the future of energy and as part of that in what the electric utilities are doing here. So I think that's genuine and kind of very grassroots. There may be some folks who are kind of confusing the issue a little bit, but I appreciate what Representative Lee said, which is this whole idea of a municipal or co-op utility is not something that the Commission is considering right now. They have to make a decision on the merger. And so, but in parallel, there is this discussion, this dialogue that's taking place about municipal and cooperative utilities. And so, we embrace that. There's nothing wrong with having that conversation. I think actually it's really helped reinforce for us the importance of engaging with communities And there's actually no reason why an investor-owned utility can't be just as responsive to its customers and its communities as any other form of ownership.
No, I know, Jeff. Oh no, you're somewhat restricted in your role here. I mean, you've been commenting on what is before the PUC primarily, but you've become quite an expert on energy and energy.
I don't know about that.
Probably not on purpose. But how do you feel about this concept of would the consumer advocates support a real hard look at these alternatives? County-owned utilities or co-ops.
Well, let me start by saying we're agnostic as to the ownership model for Hawaiian Electric, and we just have to be, because if somebody actually puts it together and a co-op is presented to the Public Utilities Commission for consideration, the consumer advocate has to take an independent look at that, and we have to consider it the same way we're considering the merger between NextEra and Hawaiian Electric. But I think this discussion about a co-op and a municipality coming up now just is a sign, it's a symptom of the distrust the public has over Hawaiian Electric. Also a distrust for NextEra. But people need to be realistic about what a co-op means and what a municipal-owned utility really means. It doesn't necessarily mean lower rates. I mean, that's what happened at KIUC. Rates didn't go down when KIUC bought Citizens Electric from Kauai. It was bought out Citizens Electric. Rates stayed the same, and they really haven't gone down until just recently. Same with the municipality. You have to really look at the experience that Boulder is going through right now, trying to buy out the electric utility in the city of Boulder. It's been 5 years, and they've spent over $5 million, and they're no closer to having that approved.
Okay, so let me move on now, because I'm getting a number of calls. I think I've never seen quite so many cards here.
Let me just sum this up in one sentence.
One sentence.
I think folks look at this because they look at the existing NextEra deal that's on the table, and they want to know what's the best option out there that will save the most.
Okay.
And without the shareholder profits, you'd save 4 times as much as what NextEra is putting on the table.
Okay.
All else aside.
Perfect segue for this question. This program tonight hasn't done enough to talk about consumers. It's only about how much money this will cost. Talk about what this merger will do for me, the consumer. Alan or Eric, either one of you want to take that one? How is it going to be different for the consumer? Better?
I can tell you about where we're headed and where it's going to be better for the consumers. I mean, it's all about transforming the utility. We are so far ahead of, it's difficult for people to believe here, but we have been faced with more renewable energy in this state, more distributed energy. We've been having to deal with this in real time and have learned from it. But one of the biggest lessons is that the old business model really doesn't work, and you really have to be very customer focused. So among the things that we're talking about daily, and we're about ready to come out with things, time of use rates, to be able to absorb more solar energy on our system, where we can give a lower rate during the day to do things.
I just need to interrupt you, Alan, because the question is, how will the merger do this? How will the merger help the consumers?
Well, all of these things will be done more rapidly. I went to Florida, I saw what Florida Power and Light can do. With the smart grid, with the technology, proprietary software they have, these are things I want for our system, where you can predict outages before they occur, where you can schedule things for the consumer so it doesn't occur during your football game.
Let me ask, Jeff Ono, do you think that it's going to be better for the consumer if this merger takes place?
It could be. And so one of the things we're saying is, well, let's talk the dollars first. They're offering $60 million over 4 years in credits on the rate adjustment mechanism, and that's a real dollar amount. They're offering a $10 million investment fund, $2.5 million over 4 years. That's a real dollar amount. But the $405 million that Eric was talking about, that we can't put a value on that. And the reason is that it's conditioned on the public utilities not doing certain things, not touching the energy cost adjustment clause, not changing the rate adjustment mechanism again, not or allowing HECO to have their what's called the above RAM cap adjustment.
Okay, I'm getting jargoned out here.
If I may,
Yeah.
just, I think
As briefly as you can.
to try to put it in simplest terms, Jeff, if I may, don't hit me.
Thank you.
But I think,
Two words.
but I think what he's saying is the merger will offer savings for customers. The question is whether they're big enough and certain enough. And I'd also like to say, remind folks of our track record in Florida. There are 55 utilities in the state. 50 of them are municipal and cooperative utilities. Our customers have paid the lowest rates in the state for 6 years and running. So that's our track record of offering lower cost power for customers.
Real quick question on the other side of the coin. How will the public be harmed if NextEra purchase is not approved and not replaced with something else, but HECO just goes on? What's the situation going to be? Eric Gleason, maybe 30 seconds.
Well, I think what Alan, I don't want to put words in Alan's mouth, but what he says, and I agree with, is we can, together with us, we can do it cheaper, we can do it faster, and I think we can ensure there is the access to capital that Hawaiian Electric needs to ensure this transformation to 100% renewable
Okay,
energy.
Chris Lee, 10 seconds.
I think there's a real risk here, and I just want to push back against what Eric just shared, that ultimately they're relying on nuclear and other things there that just really aren't a comparison. NextEra just lost about $4.2 billion on behalf of Florida ratepayers because they made a bad investment in LNG that didn't pencil out. These are some of the risks that need to be weighed.
Okay, I need to wrap up. Thank you very much. Great panel. On next week's show, a recent federal review found that Hawaii must improve its special education services needed by more than 10% of the state's 180,000 public school students. What is the State Department of Education doing to help students with disabilities achieve as the same level of their peers? On the next Insights, how can special education services boost achievement for Hawaii students with disabilities? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. A hui ho.